The first light over the Wyoming plains was pale and sharp, a thin veil of mist drifting low across the open land. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The air carried the damp weight of night's dew, heavy with silence, like the world itself, still asleep. Abigail Hart pressed through that hush, her worn boots scuffing the dirt trail, leaving steady tracks behind her. Her dress, patched and faded from years of wear, clung with morning moisture, but she kept on without faltering. A canvas satchel hung from her shoulder, holding only a few keepsakes, and buried inside the old leather Bible that had once belonged to her father, Josiah Hart. She had been on her feet since before dawn, pulled forward by the pale line of horizon. Her breath curled in small clouds, steady and sure. To anyone passing by, a lone woman so far from town would have raised questions. But Abigail was past fear, past doubt. 15 miles behind her lay Cheyenne, a place she had no desire to revisit. Ahead waited the spread of a man she'd never met. Caleb Boone, a name whispered among ranch hands and drifters. They called him a loner, a man who didn't stomach company, and had even less time for women. But Abigail hadn't come for courtesy. She came because her father's land, his last gift, would wither unless she learned cattle work, and that meant learning to milk. She shifted the strap of her satchel and brushed a damp strand of hair from her face. She'd known hardship, the bite of prairie winters, the hollow ache of widowhood at 30, the weight of being left behind by a man who'd quit her long before the grave claimed him. Still, as she neared the weathered gate, a strange nervousness stirred, like the land itself was testing her will. The steady thud of an axe split the mist. Beyond the gate stood a plain but solid homestead. A man worked in the yard, framed against the fog. Caleb Boone. Broad, iron-haired, his face etched by years of sun and sorrow. He swung the axe with the precision of long habit sleeves rolled to reveal scarred, sinewed arms. When Abigail's boots crunched the gravel, he halted mid-swing. Morning, she called, voice steady, though her heart thundered. He turned, squinting through the fog. His eyes, dark as storm clouds, settled on her with quiet caution. "You're a long way from town," he said, his voice rough as stone dragged across timber. "I know." Abigail's grip tightened on the gatepost. "My name's Abigail Hart. I inherited land from my father, Josiah. It lies north of here. I need to learn how to care for cattle, how to milk especially. Folks say you're the best man to teach." Caleb leaned on the axe handle, surprise flickering just faintly. "You walked out here to learn how to milk a cow?" "Yes," she answered without flinching. "I don't want charity. I want work. I want to stand on my own 2 feet." Silence stretched between them, broken only by a meadowlark's cry and the groan of the gate beneath her hand. Caleb studied her eyes, unreadable. He'd seen women come before with smooth talk or desperate eyes, but this one was different. No pleading, no guile. Just plain resolve. "You've got a long walk back to Cheyenne if I say no," he tested. "Then I'll walk it," Abigail replied, calm and firm. "But I'd rather stay work for the lessons. Whatever needs doing, fixing fences, feeding stock, I'll do it. Just teach me." For a moment, neither spoke. The sun crept higher, tinting the mist with rose gold. Caleb finally set the axe into the block. 2 weeks. Sunrise lessons. You do as I say when I say. No questions. No talk outside the work. Clear, understood, she answered. Her shoulders squared, her tone unshaken. Something in her voice tugged at a memory Caleb thought buried. He pulled his gloves from the post and nodded toward the barn. "Boots in the tack room. Those city shoes won't last you." Abigail followed through the gate, her heart a knot of relief and unease. The spread stretched wide, dry earth, leaning fences, a barn worn by years. It wasn't much yet, it carried a stern dignity. She caught the sagging porch, the untouched rocker, the neat stack of firewood, the corral where black and white cows grazed in the pale light. Caleb walked ahead, boots crunching steady. He said nothing, but his silence was not shyness. It was the silence of a man who'd chosen to live apart. "You've lived here long?" she asked carefully. "Long enough," he replied curtly. She bit her lip, held back further questions. She hadn't come to pry. She had come with a purpose, and she wouldn't risk it with idle words. Inside the barn smelled of hay leather and milk. Sunbeams cut through the planks, striping the straw-strewn floor with gold. Abigail paused at the threshold, hand resting on the frame. "This place," she whispered. "It feels alive." Caleb shot her a sidelong glance. "It's just a barn." "Maybe to you," Abigail answered softly. "But for someone like me who's been drifting without roots." She cut herself short, too much too soon. Caleb said nothing. He reached for a pair of worn gloves and a stool, setting them down near Ruby, the gentlest cow in his herd. "We'll start at first light tomorrow," he said flatly. "You're worn out. Best get some rest." Abigail hesitated. "Where? There's a bunkhouse out back." He jerked his chin toward a small, weathered shack beyond the barn. "Old, but it'll keep the wind off you." By the time the sun climbed higher, Abigail lingered at the barn door, staring out at the endless sweep of prairie. The plains rolled into the horizon, the far mountains brushed with morning gold. A mix of fear and calm tugged at her, like she'd stepped into a tale larger than herself. Caleb stood nearby, silent, his eyes fixed on her. Something about her reminded him of the man he'd once been before betrayal hardened him. When her gaze met his, neither turned away. In that stillness, something unspoken passed between them. Fate had set their paths across one another, though neither yet knew why. When Abigail Hart stepped through that gate, neither she nor Caleb Boone guessed their lives were already shifting. The next dawn spilled pale gold across the Wyoming plains. Abigail gripped the barn frame breath tight, as though pausing on the edge of a new life. The air inside was thick with the scents of hay leather and livestock. A faint rustle came from Ruby's stall, her tail swishing lazily. Caleb was already there, sleeves rolled up, filling the trough with practiced movements. He didn't look up when Abigail entered, but his gravel-deep voice filled the barn. "Day starts early here. You're late." Abigail frowned, glancing at the dim light outside. "It's barely sunrise." "Then you'll learn," Caleb replied, turning just enough for a faint smirk to touch his eyes. "Cattle don't bend to your clock. They live by rhythm, and that rhythm starts before daylight." Abigail stepped forward, nerves pulling at her. The barn seemed larger inside its beams, lost in shadows, golden streaks cutting through the boards. Every creak and scent felt strange, yet strangely welcoming. Caleb led her to Ruby, whose black and white hide glistened in the slanting light. "Start by letting her know you're there," he instructed. "Cows spook easy if you come charging in." Abigail swallowed hard and moved slow, laying a tentative hand on Ruby's shoulder. The cow shifted eyes, blinking with mild curiosity. "She won't bite," Caleb muttered. "But she'll kick if you crowd her wrong. Keep clear of the hind legs." Abigail settled onto the stool, mimicking Caleb as he showed her how to set the bucket. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the udder, trying to recall every detail. "Not like that," Caleb corrected, crouching beside her. His hands moved with easy rhythm. "Don't yank. Coax her. Gentle squeeze, top to bottom. Feel it. Don't force it." Abigail tried again. A thin stream of milk splashed into the pail, sharp and bright. A smile tugged at her lips. "Better," Caleb said, watching her closely. "Steady hands. It's all rhythm." For minutes, they worked in silence, broken only by milk hitting metal and Ruby shifting her weight. Abigail's arms began to ache, and she bit her lip to hide it. "Hurts, doesn't it?" Caleb asked, as if reading her mind. "A little," she admitted. "Good. Means you're working. First day's always worst. Tomorrow'll shake less." Sweat dotted her brow in the cool air. "How long did it take you to learn?" Caleb's eyes darkened, drawn to some far memory. "Long enough," he said simply, and turned back to stacking hay. By the second morning, Abigail arrived before the first streak of dawn. Her body ached, her arms stiff, but she refused to yield. Caleb was already in the yard, splitting logs with a rhythm like prayer. "You're early," he remarked without looking up. "You said sunrise," she answered, steady. "Figured I'd start before it." He gave a small nod, tossing another log onto the pile. "Good. Let's see if you remembered." The barn no longer felt daunting. Abigail walked in sure-footed, her resolve unmistakable. Ruby shifted at her presence with a low grunt. She fetched stool and bucket without waiting. Caleb leaned on a post. "Easy and calm," he said, eyes sharp. Abigail crouched, hands still trembling but steadier, and at her first try, a stream of milk struck the bucket. Pride lit her face. "Better," Caleb muttered under his breath. It took half an hour to fill the bucket, her arms quivering, but she didn't stop. Caleb, used to quitters, found himself impressed. Day after day, the rhythm settled into them both. Abigail rose with the first hint of light, following Caleb's lead through the morning chores. She learned to haul heavy buckets without spilling, spread clean straw across the stalls, and guide stubborn cattle with a hand both firm and kind. Her palms, once soft and pale, grew lined with calluses, and each time she glanced at them, a strange pride welled up inside. Caleb kept his distance in words, yet his sharp eyes never left her progress. He noticed the way she hummed as she worked, sometimes old hymns, sometimes tunes he didn't recognize. Her low, steady voice carried through the barn, and even the cows seemed calmed by it. One morning, when the faint notes of "Nearer, my God, to Thee" floated through the air, Caleb froze mid-step. It had been years since he'd heard that hymn. His mother, Caroline Boone, had once sung it in the kitchen, while kneading bread, her voice drifting through the rooms of a home long gone. For an instant, he wasn't standing in a barn with Abigail, he was a boy again, safe in a world that had slipped away. "You sing?" He said his words, startling her. Abigail looked up, surprised. "Only when I work. Helps me keep my mind steady." "You sound like..." Caleb stopped short, shaking his head. "Never mind." She smiled faintly. "My father, Josiah Hart, used to say, music keeps a person's spirit from breaking even when the body's worn out." Caleb gave no answer, but something in his expression softened. By the fourth morning, their silence no longer carried weight. It had turned easy, almost companionable. Caleb began offering small pointers without his usual edge. He showed her how to check a cow's hooves, how to read their restlessness, how to notice discomfort. Abigail listened closely, brow furrowed in concentration. She wasn't just learning cattle work, she was settling into a rhythm of patience, repetition, and quiet strength. Both of them knew something was shifting, though neither dared name it. By the fifth morning, Abigail moved through the barn like she belonged there. She tied her hair back with a ribbon, rolled up her sleeves, and bent to the tasks without a word. Her hands were still clumsy in moments, but Caleb could no longer deny her grit. As she milked Ruby, she began to hum again, the melody soft and low, twining with the waking sounds of the barn. It was not a song Caleb knew, but it carried a haunting sweetness. He leaned against the doorway, arms folded, listening. "Where'd you pick up that tune?" he asked, when she paused to stretch her tired fingers. Abigail glanced up. "My father. He used to sing it when the sun dipped low and the herd grew quiet. Said it was a prayer more than a song." Caleb tilted his head. Sounds like a hymn. A faint smile touched her lips. Most of his songs were. He believed work and faith walked hand in hand. Said if a man didn't labor with his own hands, he couldn't feel God's blessings. Caleb's jaw tightened. Faith was something he hadn't touched in years, not since betrayal left him hollow and doubting everything he'd once clung to. Yet her words stirred something faint, like embers smoldering in ashes thought cold. Later that day, as she hauled water from the well, Caleb found himself watching her again. Not just her strength, but the way she bore it. She worked without complaint, without bitterness, with a quiet will that spoke of survival on harsh ground. "You don't gripe much," he said, as she wiped the sweat from her brow. She gave a soft laugh. "Would it change the work if I did? No, but most wouldn't last past the first day." "I'm not most folks," Abigail answered steadily. "I'm building something that'll last. Complaining won't get me there." Caleb studied her, searching for cracks in her resolve, but found none. With a slow nod, he gave what passed for approval. That evening, when the chores were done, they sat side by side on the porch steps. The sun bled into the horizon, painting the sky in bands of orange and rose. They sat quiet for a long time, listening to crickets and distant lowing cattle. "It's a hard land," Abigail said at last. "Hard, but beautiful." Caleb's gaze drifted over the fields. "It's not much. Just dirt and fences." "Maybe," she said softly, "but it feels alive, like it remembers the hands that worked it." His eyes flickered. Land doesn't remember. People do. And sometimes that's the problem. There was a weight in his voice, but she didn't pry. Instead, she drew her father's Bible from her satchel, setting it gently in her lap. Her fingers traced its worn cover. "He used to say this book carried more than faith," she murmured. "It carried history, the story of our family. Every verse he marked, every note he scribbled. When he died, this was all I had left." Caleb said nothing, but the look in his eyes was different now, less guarded, more human. The days that followed fell into rhythm sunrise labor, the steady sound of milk striking metal. Yet beneath that rhythm, Caleb began to notice more. Abigail's easy smiles for the cattle, her soft humming at work, but also the moments when her face changed, when she thought herself unseen. Her eyes would fix on the horizon, shadowed by thoughts unspoken. Her eyes often drifted toward the horizon, as though searching for someone or bracing for something. A tautness clung to her shoulders, a faint tremor in her hands, telling Caleb her mind was far from the chores at hand. One morning, after stacking hay in the loft, he caught her standing in the barn doorway, staring down the long road that wound toward Cheyenne. The early light glinted through her hair, but her expression was all steel guarded hard. "Expecting company?" Caleb asked, wiping sweat from his brow. Abigail flinched at the sound of his voice. "No, why would I?" He shrugged. "You've been watching that road 3 mornings in a row. Figured maybe you were waiting for someone to ride in." Her lips bent into a faint, unconvincing smile. "I'd just like to know what's coming down the trail." Caleb narrowed his eyes, but let it pass. For now. Later that day, while she worked with Ruby, he leaned against the barn wall, arms crossed. He studied her hands, stronger, steadier than they'd been at the start. "You're improving," he said. She glanced up with a flicker of pride. "I'm trying. Trying won't keep you alive out here," he replied. "Out here you learn fast, or the land chews you up. So tell me, why are you really here, Abigail? A woman doesn't walk 15 miles just to learn to milk a cow." Her hands froze on the bucket. For a heartbeat, it seemed she might answer. But she straightened, brushed her palms on her dress, and said evenly, "We all have pasts, Mr. Boone. Mine doesn't matter anymore." "Doesn't matter? Or you just don't want to talk about it?" His eyes held hers. Maybe both. Caleb didn't press. He'd learned that truth had its own time. That evening, Abigail lingered late, cleaning the barn. Caleb stood in the doorway watching her kneel in the straw sleeves, rolled up hair slipping loose from its braid. The solemn way she moved struck him. It looked like prayer in the shape of work. When she rose, he noticed the small leather Bible tucked into her satchel, worn smooth from years of use. "You carry that everywhere," Caleb said quietly. Abigail's gaze flicked to the Bible, then back at him. "It was my father's. Josiah Hart told me it would keep me safe even when he couldn't." Her fingers tightened on the strap. "Guess it's the only thing I trust to watch my back." There was a shadow in her tone that gave Caleb pause. He thought of asking more, but let it go. That night, long after she'd gone to the bunkhouse, he sat on the porch with his rifle leaning close, staring into the dark plains, listening to the wind in the grass. His gut told him Abigail's story wasn't nearly as simple as she made it out. And in Wyoming, secrets had a way of drawing danger. At dawn, as a fierce orange streak lit the horizon, Caleb found the first sign. Walking his usual fence line, his boot caught on a fresh hoof print pressed into the soft earth along the eastern boundary. It wasn't one of his herd, he knew their tracks by heart. This one was deeper, sharper. A rider had come through, maybe in the night. He crouched, brushing his hand across the mark, then followed a few steps until a second print appeared leading north toward the road. Whoever it was. They hadn't stopped to chat. When he returned, Abigail was already hauling water, humming low. "You see anyone out here this morning?" he asked, casual in tone. She turned, startled. "No." "Y tracks," Caleb said. "Somebody's been riding close." Abigail froze, her grip tightening on the bucket handle. "Could have been anyone. Plenty of folks use the road." "Not this close to the fence line," he answered, voice low and steady. "Most keep their distance unless they've got business. And this?" His eyes narrowed. "This doesn't feel like chance." For the rest of the morning, Abigail's usual calm slipped. She moved faster, cast glances toward the horizon. Caleb noticed, though he held his tongue. Every instinct in him whispered the same warning trouble was coming. That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, he found her outside the bunkhouse with Josiah's Bible open on her lap. She wasn't reading. Her gaze was fixed on the road, slicing through the valley like a scar. "Who are you watching for?" he asked, leaning against the railing. She jumped, snapping the book shut. "No one." "Abigail." His voice softened, but carried the weight of experience. "I've seen that look before. That's the look of someone waiting for trouble." Her jaw tightened. "Maybe I just don't like surprises." He studied her for a long moment. "You don't have to tell me everything, but if you've got enemies, I need to know. I won't have danger walking into my barn without warning." Her eyes dropped. "It's not like that. I just have reasons to be careful." The next morning, a sound rolled across the wind, a faint, rhythmic pounding. Caleb stiffened. Stepping out onto the porch, he listened. The unmistakable thunder of hooves carried across the plains. From the bunkhouse, Abigail stepped out, her face pale, clutching her satchel, as if she might bolt at any moment. "You hear it too?" Caleb asked, his voice flat as stone. She only nodded. The drumming faded westward, but the weight it left hung in the air. Caleb's eyes sharpened. "You know who's out there, don't you?" Abigail's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, he caught raw fear in her eyes. That night, Caleb sat on the porch again, rifle laid across his lap. The wind had turned colder heavy with ghosts of old fights. Somewhere out beyond the hills, someone was riding, and from the way, Abigail locked her door and whispered a prayer before lying down. He knew she felt it too. By the 6th day, the wind turned restless, carrying the smell of rain. Gray clouds gathered above the plains, their shadows sweeping across the ranch like dark wings. Abigail worked in silence, her braid damp against her back. Caleb caught the tremor in her hands as she reached for the stool. "You're distracted," he said from the stall. "What's gnawing at you?" She paused, eyes fixed on the pale horizon. "Do you ever feel like the past won't let go no matter how far you run?" His jaw tightened. Every damn day. Their eyes met pain in hers, but something else, too, hope. That evening the storm broke, rain hammering the roof. The barn smelled of wet hay and timber. Caleb found her sitting by the open door, watching the sky split with lightning. "Storm's gonna be rough," he said, stepping inside. "You should rest." "I like the rain," she murmured, knees drawn to her chest. "When I was little, I'd sit with my father, Josiah Hart, and listen to the thunder. He said it was God's way of reminding us he's still there, even when the world feels empty." Caleb eased down a few feet away, boots creaking. "Sounds like your father was a wise man." Abigail's smile was soft, touched with sorrow. "He was. He taught me about faith, about standing tall, even when life tries to break you." They listened together, the rain filling the silence, smoothing the rough edges of the day. Caleb remembered a time long ago when he too had believed. "I used to have faith," he admitted quietly. "But life strips things away until you're left with nothing to hold on to." "Maybe you just forgot where to look?" she answered steadily. "Faith isn't gone, Caleb. It's only waiting for you to find it again." Later, as the storm eased, Caleb lit the lantern. Abigail helped gather tools and feed their hands, brushing more than once. Each touch sent a jolt through him, warmer than any lantern's glow. "You've learned faster than I expected," he said, breaking the quiet. She laughed softly. "Guess I had a good teacher." He studied her. Then the resilience in her eyes, the quiet fire that stirred something he thought buried. By the end of the 2nd week, the distance between them had narrowed. Abigail moved with confidence, now her hands sure her presence a rhythm he'd come to expect. One night on the porch, watching the storm fade, she glanced at him. "You've been kind to me, Caleb. More than you had to be. I won't forget it." He held her gaze, voice low. "I'm not sure kindness has much to do with it anymore." The truth hung heavy between them, dangerous and full of promise. The next morning was eerily still. Caleb felt the hair rise on his neck as he stacked firewood. A sound rolled through the earth hoofbeats, 3, maybe 4 horses. He straightened eyes, narrowing at the horizon. Over the ridge, dark shapes took form, riders, dust trailing behind like smoke from a fire. "Abigail," he called, his voice taut. "Get inside." She stepped from the barn, wiping her hands on her apron. "What is it, riders?" he said, not breaking his gaze from the horizon. His tone left no doubt. Her breath caught. She saw them cresting the rise, 3 men, hats low, their horses blowing steam. Her face drained of color, her grip tightening on the apron's edge. "They found me," she whispered. Caleb spun. "Who?" She gave no answer. The riders slowed at the gate. The lead, a lean man with a scar carved from ear to jaw, grinned like a wolf. A revolver gleamed at his side. "Boone," his voice slashed the morning air. "We know she's here. Hand over Abigail Hart and we'll ride out peaceful." Caleb's grip tightened on the axe handle. He stepped forward, boots planted firm. "You're on my land. Speak your piece, then be gone." The scarred man's grin widened. "Our piece is her, ain't that right, sweetheart?" Abigail flinched as the rider's eyes cut straight through her. She took a step back, but Caleb shifted to block their view, his broad shoulders firm as a wall. "You'll be leaving now," he said, voice cold and steady as iron. The second rider, thick-set and mean-eyed, leaned forward in his saddle. "You don't want this fight, old man. Hand her over and nobody gets hurt." Caleb's chest rose and fell, slow, controlled. Behind him, Abigail's breath quickened. He didn't yet know what history tied her to these men, but he knew one truth trouble had ridden in, and it wasn't leaving without a price. "Get back inside, Abigail," he murmured low but firm. But she didn't move. Her feet stayed planted, eyes locked on the scarred rider like he'd stepped out of a nightmare. Caleb saw the tremor in her hands and shifted closer, a shield between her and them. "Who are they, Abigail?" His tone was calm but sharp as a blade. She swallowed hard, lips trembling. They're from my husband's past. Before he died, he borrowed money from the wrong kind of men. I thought I'd left them behind in Cheyenne." Caleb's eyes narrowed, a storm building. "And you didn't think to mention this before. I didn't want to drag you into it," she whispered. Guilt weighing every word. "I thought if I stayed quiet, worked hard, maybe they'd never find me." The scarred rider chuckled darkly, catching enough to sneer. "She's a sly one, Boone. I'll give her that. But debts don't vanish, and neither do we." Caleb stepped forward, voice rising, steady and fierce. "You're not taking her. Not today. Not ever." Abigail grabbed his arm, her eyes wide. "Caleb, you don't have to do this. They'll kill you." He looked down at her, and for the first time in years, his expression softened. "I've spent too long letting the world pass me by. I'm not about to stand by and let them take what's right." Her breath caught. He wasn't just protecting her, he was choosing a side one that could cost him dearly. The scarred man's grin faded, his tone turning sharp. "Last chance, Boone. Hand her over, or we'll take her off your grave." Caleb's hand slid toward the Winchester propped by the fence post. In that moment, Abigail saw it something fierce in him, like a man who'd finally woken after years of slumber. "Go inside," he said, voice leaving no room for argument. "Lock the door." "I'm tired of running," she whispered. He paused, then, with a slow nod, pressed a heavy shovel into her hands. "Then stand with me." The riders lingered just beyond the gate horses, stamping, snorting clouds of steam in the chill air. The scarred man tipped his hat back, wolfish grin curling. "You got one chance to make this easy," he called. Caleb ignored him, turning to Abigail, voice low and deliberate. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before they pull something stupid. You know how to load a rifle?" She shook her head, clutching the shovel like her life depended on it. "I've never fired a gun. Then stay near the barn. If anyone comes at you, swing hard, don't hesitate." He grabbed a cartridge belt from the porch rail, checked the Winchester with sharp precision. Inside, the cows shifted nervously. Ruby let out a low, uneasy bellow. Abigail knelt to calm her, running a hand along the cow's neck. "Easy, girl," she whispered. "Don't let the noise spook you," Caleb said, setting another box of cartridges on a hay bale. "I'll try to keep 'em outside the fence. If they cross it—" He stopped, jaw tight. "We fight." Abigail straightened eyes, flashing with resolve. "I'm not hiding this time, Caleb. I'm done being afraid." He met her gaze, finding no fear there, only steel. Something inside him shifted. For years he'd lived like a ghost, hollowed out by loss. But with Abigail standing beside him, he felt alive again. The riders made their move. The stocky one swung down, rattling the gate as he yanked his revolver. "This is your last warning, Boone," he barked. Caleb strode from the barn, rifle in hand, barrel gleaming in the new sun. "You want her," he called, voice hard as steel. "Come and try." The scarred man grinned. "Have it your way." With a sharp signal, the other two spurred their horses, dust rising as they charged the fence. Abigail's grip tightened on the shovel breath, shallow but steady. "Caleb," she whispered. "I see them," he replied, raising the Winchester to his shoulder. The first shot cracked the morning echoing through the valley. The rifle's thunder split the stillness, the lead rider's hat spinning into the dirt as the bullet skimmed past his head. His horse reared hooves, striking the air, nearly throwing him. He cursed, dragging the reins, circling wide for another run. "Stay low!" Caleb barked, cycling the lever and firing again. This time the round tore into the stocky rider's arm. He howled, dropping his revolver into the dust. Abigail crouched by the barn door, white-knuckled on the shovel. Each shot made her flinch, but she held her ground, eyes locked on Caleb. Caleb moved with a precision Abigail had never seen in him before. His stance. Firm, his breath measured. One of the riders broke off, circling toward the barn, and her pulse hammered as she realized he was coming straight for her. Grinding her teeth, Abigail stepped from the doorway's shadow. Back away, she shouted, hefting the shovel like a spear. The man barked out a laugh and spurred closer. "You think that stick's gonna stop me?" he sneered, swinging down from the saddle. He reached for her, but Abigail lunged, driving the shovel with every ounce of strength she had. The steel blade slammed against his chest with a hollow thud, knocking him hard against the barn wall. He staggered, clutching his ribs, stunned by her fury as much as the blow. Caleb saw the commotion and let a shot crack the air above the man's head. "Take your hands off her!" He roared, his voice carrying death's promise. The scarred leader cursed and fired wildly, bullets tearing splinters from the ranch house posts, one striking close enough to sting Caleb's shoulder with flying wood. Dropping to one knee, Caleb cycled the Winchester and snapped off another shot. Dirt exploded at the hooves of the leader's horse, sending the animal rearing, nearly unseating its rider. Abigail's breath came fast, but she didn't falter. When the wounded rider staggered to his feet, she swung again, forcing him back toward his mount. Caleb advanced from the corral, his rifle leveled. "You ride out now," he growled, "or you won't ride out at all." The stocky rider, blood soaking his sleeve, spat through clenched teeth. "Boss, this ain't worth it." The scarred man glared at Caleb, hate burning hot. "This ain't over. You'll regret crossing us." Caleb's aim didn't waver. The silence stretched like a taut rope until the leader's eyes flicked to his men, one bleeding, one limping with Abigail's mark still fresh on his chest. The odds had shifted, and he knew it. "This isn't finished, Boone," he spat. "You bought yourself hours, maybe a day. We'll be back, and when we do, we'll burn this place to the ground." "You can try," Caleb answered evenly. "I'll be waiting." For a long moment, neither man moved. Then the leader snapped his reins, wheeling his horse around. The others followed, spurring hard dust, boiling behind them as they vanished over the ridge. The ranch fell silent, but for Caleb's ragged breathing. His shoulders eased, though the rifle stayed tight in his grip. Abigail stepped from behind the barn, pale-faced hair, wild, still clinging to the shovel with trembling hands. "They're gone," she whispered. For now, Caleb muttered, scanning the horizon. "But men like that don't quit." His eyes burned as he turned to her. "Why didn't you tell me the truth from the start? I needed to know what we were up against." She looked at her dust-streaked hands. "Because I thought I could outrun it. I didn't want you caught in my mess." She lifted her gaze, steady now. "But I see running won't save me anymore." Caleb's jaw tightened, but there was no anger in his eyes, only resolve. "Then we prepare. Next time we won't scare them off. We'll finish it." The quiet that settled wasn't peace. It was sharp, heavy with gun smoke, and the echo of hooves. Caleb leaned the Winchester against the porch rail, flexing his shoulder where a bullet had come too close. Just a graze, but a reminder of how narrow the margin had been. Abigail sat on the steps, shovel across her lap, staring at the dust clouds where the riders had gone. Her breath came shallow, her body still catching up to the storm that had passed. "Let me see your hand," Caleb said, kneeling beside her. "I'm fine," she murmured, though the shake in her voice betrayed her. "You're bleeding," he said firmly, pointing to the cut across her palm, where the shovel had bit into her skin. Without waiting, he dipped a cloth in the water barrel, pressing the cool rag against her wound. She flinched, but didn't pull away. He wrapped it with careful hands, surprisingly gentle. "You hit him hard," he said with a faint smirk. "Didn't think you had it in you?" A shaky laugh escaped her. "Neither did I." They sat in silence, the windmill creaking, cattle lowing in the distance. The air reeked of dust and powder. Abigail's gaze swept the torn-up yard, the shattered fence, and she whispered, "I can't let them do this to you, Caleb. This is my fight, not yours." He looked at her steadily. "You came here to stand on your own 2 feet. Well, standing means fighting sometimes, and I'm not letting them take you or this land." She searched his eyes and found no hesitation, only a man who had already chosen his side. As the sun sank, painting the ranch in long shadows, Caleb checked his rifle again. "Tonight we plan," he said. "If they return, we'll be ready." Abigail rose pale, but resolute. "Then I'll stand with you." The last light stretched across the Wyoming plains, gilding the sky in deep gold and violet, casting both of them in the glow of a fight not yet finished. Caleb and Abigail stood by the shattered fence, the silence between them thick with what neither dared put into words. The dust from the riders had long since drifted off, but their threat lingered in the air like thunder waiting to break. Caleb dragged a rough hand across the splintered post. "Tomorrow we mend this fence," he said with certainty. "But tonight we rest. We'll need our strength when they come back." Abigail nodded, though her eyes never left the road stretching toward Cheyenne. Her fingers brushed the edge of Josiah Hart's Bible, now tucked firmly under her arm. "I used to think faith was just praying for the storm to pass," she said quietly. "But maybe it's learning to stand steady when the storm breaks." Caleb studied her, the fading light glinting in his eyes. "You stood steady today. You didn't run. I had someone worth standing with," she whispered. On the porch, Caleb fetched a small first aid kit. Abigail carried warm water from the kitchen. The hush between them no longer felt like distance. It was the calm that follows battle, every breath a reminder they were still alive. As she handed him the cloth, her fingers brushed his. "Thank you," she said, her tone weighted with sincerity. "You didn't have to do what you did today." He paused, eyes on her hand, before lifting to her face. "You're wrong." "I did. If there's one thing this land has taught me, it's that some things are worth fighting for." Her breath caught, but words failed her. Night crept over the ranch as they stood side by side on the porch, watching the last colors bleed from the horizon. The wind carried the smell of rain from far hills, and for a moment the place felt almost peaceful. "Do you think they'll come back tonight?" Abigail asked. Caleb's hand rested on the rifle by the wall. "If they do," he said evenly, "they'll find us ready." The sun hung low, bleeding orange across the plains. The ranch bore the scars of the morning's fight, splintered posts, torn up earth, the faint tang of powder still in the air. Caleb stood at the gate, jaw hard, one hand on the rough wood, staring toward where the riders had vanished. Abigail came quietly, boots crunching over dirt. She had washed the blood and dust from her hands, but the weight in her eyes remained. Standing beside him, she followed his gaze. "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked in a low voice. He listened to the uneasy stillness before answering. Men like that don't forget. They'll come back when they think we're weak. Abigail's grip tightened on her father's Bible. Then I should go. They want me, not you. If I leave, maybe they'll leave you be. Caleb turned his face shadowed in the dimming light. And where would you run, Abigail? Back to Cheyenne. Back to running from ghosts. His voice softened, but there was a jagged truth in it. You came here because you wanted more, because you wanted to stand on your own feet. Her lips trembled. I did. But I never meant for you to get hurt. I can't stay if it puts you in danger. He stepped closer, his gaze unflinching. You think I've spent 20 years alone because I feared danger? A humorless chuckle escaped him. No. I was afraid of feeling anything worth fighting for again. You changed that. Abigail blinked, startled by the weight of his words. He drew a breath as though the confession had lifted a stone from his chest. You're not leaving, Abigail, he said firmly. Not if you want this land to mean something, and not if you want me fighting at your side. The silence stretched heavy yet warm until she nodded, strength settling over her face. I'm tired of running, Caleb. If they come back, I'll stand with you. Good, he said simply, a faint smile breaking through for the first time since the fight. As the sun slipped lower, Caleb carried out 2 wooden chairs and set them on the porch. Sit, he said. We've got something to do. She frowned. What? Pray, he answered, almost shy. It's been a long time since I asked God for anything. But tonight seems a good place to start. Abigail's eyes softened. She placed the Bible on her lap, tracing its worn cover. Together they bowed their heads as dusk bathed the ranch in gold. Caleb's voice was rough, uncertain, but steady enough to carry. If God brought us here, He'll see us through. We ask for strength for courage, and for the will to hold on to what matters. Amen. Abigail whispered, her voice unwavering. They sat beneath the first stars, neither speaking. They didn't need to. For the first time in years, Caleb felt the quiet peace of a man who'd stopped running from his own heart. The next morning dawned clear, the air sharp with the smell of damp earth. The mountains rose crisp against the horizon. Caleb was already at the fence, steady in his work, repairing what the fight had broken, mending not just wood and wire, but his own resolve. Abigail stepped out of the barn, carrying a bucket of water, her hair still damp from washing. Shadows lingered beneath her eyes, but there was a quiet fire in her expression that hadn't dimmed. She set the bucket beside Caleb and knelt to steady a post while he worked. You don't have to help with this, Caleb said, glancing at her. Abigail gave a small, steady smile. If this is going to be my home too, then I do. The words lingered between them, soft but heavy with promise. Caleb met her gaze, and in that look something deeper passed. This wasn't only about surviving anymore. It was about building something worth holding on to. By noon, the fence stood straight once again. Abigail wiped the sweat from her forehead, leaving a streak of dust across her cheek. Caleb chuckled low, reaching over to brush it away with his thumb. The brief contact sent warmth through them both, and for a moment neither of them moved. Caleb, she whispered. Thank you for everything. You don't need to thank me, he replied. This land, it doesn't feel like just mine anymore. Feels like it belongs to us both. Abigail's gaze lingered on his, searching steady. You really believe we can hold it? That we can face whatever comes? Caleb turned his eyes toward the endless sweep of the plains. I believe in hard work. I believe in standing your ground. And he turned back to her, voice firm, I believe in you. As evening fell, they stood together at the wooden gate, looking out at the valley road. The sky burned crimson and gold, the light reflecting in Abigail's eyes. Do you hear that? She asked softly. Caleb tilted his head. Faint but clear, the echo of hoofbeats carried across the distance. Too far to tell friend from foe, but both of them knew Wyoming had a way of bringing storms. Could be them, Caleb muttered. Abigail's hand found his fingers lacing with quiet certainty. Then let them come. We'll be ready. He glanced at her, his rough, battle-worn hand tightening around hers. We'll be ready, he echoed the words, a promise not only of protection, but of something deeper, something he'd thought buried long ago. They lingered as the sun slipped beneath the hills, the last light catching silver threads in Caleb's hair, and the determined fire in Abigail's face. The prairie wind stirred the grass, whispering through the valley like a prayer. Funny, Caleb said after a long pause. For the first time in years, this place doesn't feel so empty anymore. Abigail leaned lightly against his arm, smiling. That's because it isn't. Sometimes all it takes is two stubborn souls to make a home. Caleb nodded, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. Then I reckon this is home. The hoofbeats faded into the dark, swallowed by the vast plains. The threat wasn't gone, but neither was the strength they had found together. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.